that you're doing about 10 weeks, right, before November 26th. It's a very good initiative. So the first, I remember seeing this series when it first came up, late 90s, I think it first came up, this series on Samvidhaan, or early 2000, I can't remember, but I think I first, 2014, it's much recent, much recent. Much more recent than I thought it was late 90s, but I think it's about a decade older. Yeah. So I watched, after you invited me and you gave me homework to do, I watched it this morning, I watched it fully. So 2 or 3 things come to mind, right? One is the legality of it, as to whether the Constituent Assembly was legal in the first place. And you must have seen in the episode where there are 4 parties primarily involved, right? The Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, the British government, and the combination of the princely states. And there were a whole lot of others who are part of India today, but who are not represented in some fashion before the Constituent Assembly. The legality of this is as to who constituted the Constituent Assembly. Right? So it was actually by the British government, by the colonial government. But later, so in a way, and this is for the legal nerds, they think that, was it really then, we the people giving it to ourselves, if it was, the assembly itself was constituted pursuant to a British colonial era order, then how does it become we the people? That's the first question that many people raise. And then it was not representative in the sense that we see today, where there is universal adult suffrage. There were people who were elected to different provincial legislatures who then elected the nominees to the Constituent Assembly. So there was some form of democratic representation, but it really didn't represent the full set of people across India. Right? The princely states like Mysore did not have a representative because we were under the Maharaja. So then we the people do not include the set of princely states who would not have representatives in the Constituent Assembly. But the Constituent Assembly, I think they foresaw this sort of question of legitimacy that may come in the future. So what they did very cleverly is that they passed a resolution that the Constituent Assembly cannot be wound out by anybody else. So essentially they appropriated the power to themselves as a Constituent Assembly, and that time that group of people had the legitimacy, because the Muslim League stayed out of it, and therefore then, as it resulted in its separate country, it did not lead to questions that could have been more complicated if, as one of the options you all saw in the screening, was a United States of India with 3 different sets of governing documents. So that didn't happen. So this aspect of the Constituent Assembly appropriating to itself the power to last as long as a constitution is drafted for the country was a very deft legal maneuver. Okay? And it sort of told the British, it's not as if you can come and now wound up all the Constituent Assembly. We have now taken over and this is ours. So that is a question of legitimacy, which again, as I said, is very fine legal point and legal nerds like it, but for the common people, it doesn't really matter, because now it's not as if the Constitution was displaced in the first few decades or first few years as many skeptics at that time thought would happen. Now we are in, we're past 75 years and we're still, debating about it. It's made a sort of a resurgence in the last 10 years among the common people for various reasons. We'll touch upon some of those. While there is talk of amending the Constitution, changing X, Y, Z, etc., making it more Indian, making it more Hindu, making it more whatever anybody wants. There are always talks of that. And there's always this allegation of, oh, was it a copied constitution? And this is not just the copied constitution is not an allegation that's made only by by today's Hindu right. The allegation of the constitution being copied was made even by some serious scholars, because they felt it for a different reason. They felt that the architecture of the state and the center was a copy from the 1935 Government of India Act. So that was one of the allegations made. So is this a copied constitution? That's another aspect that comes. But one in the episode that you saw, the objectives resolution that Jawaharlal Nehru introduced, there's a history to that. So the objectives resolution didn't just happen in okay, Constituent Assembly has now come to it, so we need an objectives resolution, let's quickly do it. So the objectives resolution also had a history. It actually started in 1928 from what is called the Nehru Report. Not Jawaharlal, Motilal Nehru's committee, which actually first wrote a report which was the blueprint for India's self-governance in a sense. But it had different things. It didn't actually ask for a republic. They wanted dominion status. So we would have been something like, say what Australia is even today. It is a fully republic country, but still the British monarch is the head of the state there. And there were a few other variations. So the reason why I mentioned that is, while the episode shows how the Constituent Assembly was formed in a matter of months, right? In about 4 or 5 months is what the episode shows. The leaders of the Indian independence movement had their mind on the nature of self-governance they want for about 30-40 years before that. 20 years from the Nehru Report, 1928 to about 1946, about 20 years. But even before that, there were various discussions. So what kind of an independent nation do we want to be? And now I'm not talking about, union state and things like that. I'm talking about the object of the state. And that's why the objectives resolutions is very important. And they show that. And I think according to me, there are two sort of core parts to our constitution which shows that it is as Indian as you can ever get. One is of course the preamble, and then there's part 3. People will add part 4 and a few other things, but in my view, part 3 is the heart of the Indian constitution. And what is in part 3, the fundamental rights chapter, for those of you non-lawyers, what is in part 3 is a flavor of that is given in the preamble, right? And part 3 essentially delineates the concepts. One thing that is not delineated properly is, for example, fraternity. You don't see much of that in part 3. There's no right to fraternity. That has to come from within. So, the setting of the Constituent Assembly, while today it may seem like it was the most obvious choice, and becoming a democratic republic, a sovereign democratic republic, is the most obvious choice, the episode does show that there were contrary views. Right? The princely states probably thought, and many princely states did think that they will just go back to pre-British times, that they will be the rulers for their states. And a few states did hold out, and there's another, I'm sure there's, everybody knows about the other princely states were brought together, then followed by the reorganization of states. I mean, just take Karnataka as an example, the Mysore kingdom, then the Madras presidencies, the areas ruled by the Madras presidencies, the area ruled by the Bombay presidency, the areas that were part of the Nizam of Hyderabad, all came together to form the state of Karnataka. So there were many different options actually available. Although today it seems that the most obvious choice. I mean, what else could they have done? Is what I would ask, right? Could they have done anything other than be a sovereign republic with universal adult suffrage? Many people thought there were options, but thankfully that the persuasive leadership of the day, led by the figures that you saw in the episode, were able to convince the large majority, and they were backed, and whatever dissenting views are shown in the episode, Muslim League, princely seats, etc. The most popular leader of the day, the universally accepted leader of the day, was Gandhi, and he had the moral legitimacy to speak on behalf of the Indian people at that day. There were differences, and we all are fully aware there were differences between Gandhi and Ambedkar, there were differences between Gandhi and Nehru, there were differences between Gandhi and Patel, there were differences as a true democratic party should function. There were differences, right? And even in the other episodes that you will see in this series, you will see the detailed debate that they had on many issues. Some of the legal nuances may not come out in the episode because it was made for a common general audience, not just lawyers. But it was not as if we just took the provisions from some other text and said yes. The process it started, as we all saw, in 1946, November, December. Then it went on, as we all know, till 1949, November 26, when the Constitution, the draft of the Constitution, was formally adopted by the Constituent Assembly. So it was about 3 years. Now it doesn't take 3 years to copy. And even for the worst, copiers, if we can use that word, it doesn't take 3 years to copy. Okay, copy ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ we can finish it off very quickly, right? So the point to note is since these are topics that keep coming up, point to note is the objectives resolution. Anybody who is studying the Constitution needs to look at the history of the objectives resolution. And that was a thought process that had been ingrained in the leadership of the freedom movement. That we need to be a democratic republic, we need to have justice, social, economic and political, we need to have liberty of thought, freedom, expression, all of that. We need to have equality of status and opportunity, and fraternity. There were some things that were added to the preamble. Fraternity, for example, came much later, and largely attributed to Ambedkar. But the fundamental principles behind the preamble, which translated into Part 3, was something that was in the political consciousness from the late 1920s. So there was something that the leaders of the Indian freedom movement had thought about deeply as to what they wanted to be. So today the loose allegations are made, the blunder, mistake. Blunders and mistakes happen all the time. We do blunders and mistakes on a daily basis. So do countries make blunders and mistakes? Do constituent assemblies make blunders and mistakes? Do political leaderships, do they make blunders and mistakes? Of course they do. We are living through it. Right? I mean, we are living through the mistakes that citizens are making. Right? Like how do we see the manner and nature of democracy working today? Right? We the people don't think twice about pressing the button for people convicted of all sorts of crimes. Forget about ideology for a moment. We the people don't think twice about continuously electing the same people who are so corrupt that it stares us in the face. So there's no point in blaming political leaders for today's problems. Right? We are the problem. And I want to start, because the objectives resolution was read out, one of the most clear analysis or clear articulation of what happened on 15th August 1947 and 26th January 1950. The most clear articulation I have heard was by L.C. Jain, who was a Gandhian, who was a diplomat. He said, what was the difference between 14th August and 15th August 1947? See, on 15th August, we became the owners of this land. On 26 January 1950, we became a republic and the sovereignty was vested in the people. So ownership that became ours legitimately and morally and politically on 15th August 1947 became legally sanctioned on 26 January 1950. That's when we declared ourselves a republic. We could have declared ourselves, we become a monarchy, right? We became whatever, but we became a republic. So ownership of this country now vests in each of us. We are all part owners now because we are 1.5 billion. We only have a tiny portion of ownership on the country, but we are owners. And that is that thing we forget. We forget that we are the owners of this country. And that's what the Constitution means. It doesn't mean anything else. We have the ultimate responsibility. Now we are seeing what's happening in Nepal today. Right? Could something like that happen in India? Could, as law students we used to discuss, is it possible to write another Constitution of India? Of course, yes. I mean, France, for example, has seen so many constitutions, right? And it's supposed to be a liberal democracy, right? And France is the country which gave us, liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? So, if they can have so many constitutions, why can't we have so many constitutions? Successive constitutions. One doesn't work. What's wrong in replacing it with another? But we forget. So it is, and that's the inherent danger. And I think here I want to go to Ambedkar. This hero worshipping that Ambedkar warned us, so much. Unfortunately, he's become one victim of the hero worship. He would have condemned if he was, I would have said, don't worship, don't do hero worship, because that is the biggest danger that Ambedkar warned. Ambedkar's biggest concern about India being a democracy was this hero worship. And he was right, because he was seeing the hero worship that Gandhi and Nehru were getting. In a true democracy, you don't get that kind of hero worship. Right? Maybe the freedom movement contributed to the Mahatma's larger than life personality, which was true for that situation. But can we have the same kind of hero worship in a democratic country? What has happened after 1950? And that's what we should focus on. Let's not worry about what happened before 1950. Right? By sheer luck for all of us, we had a great set of people who thought and made the right choices at that day as to what kind of constitution we should have. What are the 3 things they said we should have? Democracy. It was non-negotiable. Voting rights to everybody, irrespective of poverty, irrespective of landholding, irrespective of caste, creed, voting rights to everybody. That was the biggest effort. I don't think there's any other country in the world that started like that. Right? And then equality. We said we have to have equality. Everybody is equal. I mean, that goes into the concept of democracy. We don't need Article 14 to tell us that we are all equal. We are all equal because we are a republic, and with sovereignty vesting in the people, and with us being a democracy. We are all equal. You should also remember this in the context of the controversy around electoral rolls and all that that's happening today. Our right to vote is not a gift being given by anyone. As I said, we are part owners. Very small, very tiny, but we are owners of this country. Right? So that is what the Constitution means to us. Part 3, the fundamental, and this is again a misconception that we should educate people about. Fundamental rights are not given by the state to us. That's a restriction we have put on the state. Who has put? We have put. We, the people of India, have put restrictions on the state. Because what is the logic behind that? Because we know that power corrupts. And it is inherent in the nature of power, and anyone who we place in that office to administer the country on all our behalves, and they are only our representatives. Right? They are only our representatives. Because all 1.5 billion of us can't be involved in day-to-day administration, we are electing a few people to administer. We can't give them the right to take away our rights, which we have inherently. If part 3 was not there, would we not be equal? Of course we would be equal. So part 3 is a restriction on the state in the way it deals with the owners of this country. We are not subjects. And that is what the Constitution gives. That is what the objective resolution which resulted in the preamble gives us. It declares that we are the owners. I want to keep coming back to this because I think in this entire debate that's happening today, and it happened, it's happened a few times. Today we may be seeing it in a different form. It happened, in the mid-70s when there was emergency imposed and when the Supreme Court sort of threw most of us under the bus by saying, during emergency all fundamental rights can also be taken away. But the fundamental concept to remember is that no state in this country who are elected by us can take away our rights, can take away our dignity, can take away our right to live, which is embodied in Article 21, which has been made quite powerful now by constant interpretation by the Supreme Court. So we should not forget that. So that's the first point that I want to make. What happened on 15th August 1947 and 26 January 1950 is not just adoption of a document which governs all of us, but it was a recognition of the sovereignty of this country residing in the people. That's the first point. And ownership residing in the people. And then we chose, what is a constitution? Right? And this is one sort of conceptual difficulty I have with many well-intentioned people trying to place the constitution on the pedestal of a holy book. We should not do that. The constitution is a law that we have given to ourselves. It is not a holy book. For political reasons we maybe say that, but as lawyers, as students of law, as students of political science, we should remember what that is. It is a document that we have given unto ourselves. It does not have any superior, inherent capacity. The people who were part of the Constituent Assembly were also people like us, who fought for our independence, and who fought for the Constitution so that we could retain our independence. So what does it mean? What is the point I am driving at? The values in the Constitution and the Constitution itself has to be fought for on a daily basis. It is not something that we can take for granted. Why do I say that? Entire human history shows that. It doesn't require it's not rocket science. Just take a look at our own history, our country's history. Rights that have been obtained in a hard-earned fashion have to be protected on a daily basis by people who believe in those rights and who value those rights and who want the next generation to also enjoy those rights. And all kinds of threats have to be opposed in a legal fashion, proper fashion, not by means unknown to the Constitution itself. We have to do it in a legitimate fashion. After all, what is the one thing that we can learn from our own freedom movement? The power of human beings. The power of human beings to convince even somebody who was ruling over us to get out. And to say we can take care of ourselves. Whether we have done a good job or a bad job is a separate issue altogether. All of us are entitled to our mistakes. All countries are also entitled to our mistakes. If we now look at what's happening in the US, which was a beacon of the rule of law for a long time, many people are questioning, okay, now what is the other beacon for the rule of law and democracy if the US is going through this problem? And today I can't remember where it was, I was reading somewhere, and I was very saddened to note that India was not mentioned. There's I think an author who's written, I can't remember, maybe the Guardian or somewhere I read yesterday or today, where he says now we have to look at Brazil and South Africa and other smaller countries, and so the author takes the name of Brazil, South Africa and South Korea as examples to look for functioning democracies. And I was immediately reminded of a lecture by a South African judge when I was a law student, who had come after South Africa, apartheid was gone and the new regime came. There was a judge who came, and he said, for all people in South Africa and in Africa, he said India was a moral leader. And why? Because we were fighting the good fight. We fought for the values that we adopt. We not only fought, but we adopted, and we were living by that. Yes, we had minor blips. But today when I saw that the US was not mentioned, the author was saying that the US is no longer the beacon for democracy and rule of law, and he needs to take Brazil, South Africa and South Korea. And there was not even a mention of India. That is the challenge that we are facing today. What is it that we are facing? And I want to relate it to two more things, right? And I don't want to deal only with this ideology problem which we are all facing today, right? The dominant political party today is pushing a particular kind of ideology. But that is not the only danger that our democracy faces, that our constitutional democracy faces. The very heart of democracy, which is how elections are conducted and how we vote in elections and how elections have become out of reach for the ordinary citizen. How many in this room, say, can contest properly in a free and fair manner in any election? Forget about MP or MLA. Even in corporation election we can't contest. What is the problem? The enormous amount of monetary resources that are spent in election. That is what is eating away at our democracy. Legislatures and parliament and municipalities are all dominated by people. In some other context, somebody said, are these people who we would like to invite to our house for a dinner? He said that is the test he will think of when he votes. Ivrna nam manege kariboda. Does everybody know Kannada? Ivrna nam manege ಊಟಕ್ಕೆ ಕರಿಬೋದಾ? With my kids, with my sister, with my brother. He said when you vote, that is a test that you need to have in mind. Do we have that? So whose fault is it? We the people. That is a responsibility that we have, to vote properly, to educate others to vote properly, and reclaiming this democracy in a fashion that it works properly. That's a tough task. It's easy for me to talk. These are all high words, easy words to use. But it's a difficult task. It's not easy. And people are working. It's not as if we have not been working. Since 1950, there have been people who are working to ensure that democratic norms remain in our country. And even today they are working. And in a way, it's something to be proud of, that we have had continuous elections. except for a blip in the mid-70s, it's not as if we have not had elections to the state legislature or the parliament. That happens continuously. There's peaceful transfer of power. Those are also all aspects of democracy which show that we are doing well. Right? But you can see the chinks in the armor. And those chinks in the armor don't come only from one political party or another political party. It's the way in which our political system has become corrupted by the lack of democracy in political parties and our inability to conduct free and fair elections. I was speaking at another event about 15 days ago, and I said, and this I used to say about 15 years ago, not just after the BJP has come to power. I think the only body that believes that elections happen in a fully free and fair manner, please note my words, I don't want to be misunderstood, fully free and fair manner is the Election Commission. Nobody else believes that. Why? Simple example. They put a monetary limit, spending limit on candidates. Nobody follows that. Right? So who believes in free and fair elections? But that doesn't mean that our right to vote has been taken away. We won't vote. Right? And people have become smart. They may take, incentives from many parties, but they still will vote however they want. Right? So that is it. But the threat that this poses, this extreme monetary infusion into the political process, that is the biggest threat, and the criminalization of politics. Money and criminalization of politics are the biggest threat to democracy. Ideology, we will figure it out. My view is, with so much of a rich history in our country, which throughout our history we have had these constant battles, right? Not physical battles, but battles of ideas. We are not a country that's bereft of ideas. You go to any part of the country, in each state there will be multiple ideas that state is known for. Take our own state. How many different movements that we can identify in different parts of our state that have propagated the same values as the constitution is propagating, as a constitution contains within it. Not one or two, multiple. This narrative that is being sought to be built today, it is not Indian, is nonsense. We just have to open our eyes and ears to see the idea all around us, not just today, even in our own history, in our own families. So, I'm not so worried about the contestation of ideology. I think ideology will come and go, right? As long as we remain true to what we believe in. Ideologies will come and go. Contestation of ideas should happen. That's the nature of a democracy. We don't want ideology to be imposed by one ruling party. That is what we should oppose. You propagate your ideology. That is democracy. There is no problem. You convince the set of people that you get elected. There is no problem in that. But saying everybody should follow my ideology, that's when it's not democracy. Right? So that is the contrast that we need to know when you see the rest of the series. There were representatives of the dominant ideology today in the Constituent Assembly. They debated that ideology. Right? So these ideas were debated. I'm not saying just because we chose one set of ideas in 1950, we should follow the same idea today. That is not the point. But the essential heart of our constitution, this part 3 and the preamble, that is timeless. Why will we accept any ideology which says I am not equal to somebody else? Why should we? It's stupid beyond belief. Right? It's not for today's day and age. There may have been times, we have had many kings, we revere some kings even today, they did great things. Will we accept that today? No. But that is what our elected representatives want to become. Once you elect them, they want to become kings. And they don't want any opposition. They don't want any discussion, any dialogue. That is the ideology we should be worried about. What is it that we are electing? Is the ideology related to the democratic ideal, to the idea that each one of us is equal, to the idea that each one of us is an owner of this country? I think that is the message that we should think of and look at and debate over the next 10 weeks. Yeah, not 10 weeks, 10 weeks. So I'll stop there, and if there are any questions, we can